It's a nice day out in our wonderful metropolis, Montestrel, a prosperous city where the brilliant and the talented come to thrive, where magic flourishes to aid the people, and the mundane does just as much to support with their wisdom, where the hustle of people continues bustling even if the end of the day has come and passed, where the government works adequately to maintain peace, while the unlawful works harder to disturb it. But as the rush of ending office hours began to settle, and the people of Montestrel closed their books, clocking out and began walking back home, unwinding, relaxing, grabbing a bite of dinner before watching the television or listening to the nighttime radio. A couple of detectives are still hard at work, pressing their fingers rapidly onto the typewriter, documenting their previous tasks. Their little building is tucked at the corners of an alleyway. Hidden from the busy main street, a small yet simple professional sign is hung at the front of the walls of their brick fence. Tyra Stenberg's Riddle Hunting Private Detective Agency Incorporated, and just below is a smaller sign that says, "Need ears and eyes to find lost things, pets, and husbands? Contact Tyra Stenberg here," followed by a string of numbers, presumably the agency's contact. It's been rather quiet in the agency, though not because they're short on work. Quite the opposite. They're swamped, to the point that most of their members are out and about doing their jobs still. Those who are in the office could only sigh in relief, having finally reached their end of the job, though perhaps their momentary peace has threatened to soon end, as a pair of footsteps inched closer towards the door. Hushed lips and quivering legs, a woman and a child reaching the front of the building as a finger pressed the doorbell. And after a moment, they were let in. Inside the building, the two detectives are still engrossed in their work. One of the detectives was a rather stout, bespectacled man with a slight scowl on his face. He calls himself Bullseye. The other was a lean and tall man with an ever-present smile on his face. His name is Ashley Walker. Back and forth they continue to banter, Ashley being the person who starts the conversation most, while the stout man, Bullseye, would be the first to cut it short. Ashley seemed to be caught in a rather passionate debate with his partner in justice. "I'm just saying, Claire. Sugar provides energy sources for people's bodies to function properly. I mean, way back then, sugar was used for medicinal purposes for their healing properties. It's crucial and important even to keep it in our daily diets." "It's Bullseye. How many times do I need to keep telling you to stop calling me that? And I'm not saying it's not important. Literally all I am telling you is to cut back on the crunchy cream donuts. You've been hounding them for 2 weeks straight now, and it's even more annoying to deal with you in sugar high." I do not get sugar high. I think I'll be the judge of that. And as the hour continued, talking to each other amidst working, they heard a knock on the door. A woman's voice can be heard from the other side, a familiar one for these two. "Boys, you busy in there? I got you something. Come to my office." The two men looked at each other before calling out to the voice of their boss. "Yes, ma'am. We'll be right there," Bullseye called out. And as her footsteps moved away, they looked at each other again, letting out a tired sigh. Bullseye spoke first this time. "You know what's coming?" "Yeah," Ashley replied. And Bullseye sighed yet again. "We haven't even finished our paperwork for the last case." "No rest for the wicked," replied Walker. And the two detectives rose from their seats, walking just a little tiredly towards the door and onward to their next. ever continue his cases. In a room different from the previous one, there are 4 people present in the chief's office. The chief herself, a woman looking roughly like in her mid to late 40s, sitting on an armchair behind a desk. Another is an older man standing next to the woman. He has salt and pepper hair and a neat little mustache sitting on top of his serious face. The other 2 are the woman and the child that had entered the agency just a while ago. The woman seems to be a maid, or at least she is dressed like one, though her dress is rather tattered and dirty. While the child can't be older than 8 years old, she is hugging onto the woman tightly and quietly, shaking ever so slightly but with a rather blank expression. Then there was a knock on the door, presumably the 2 detectives, to which the woman called them in. Ashley and Bullseye entered the room. The 2 glazed their eyes over at the 2 guests. A quick guess of the situation was made in their minds, though neither spoke of it. The woman, who calls herself Tyra Stenberg, looked to the maid and the girl, her hand stretched out towards the 2 men who had just come in. "These are Detective Liu and Walker. They will be handling your investigation." She nodded at the men, to which Bullseye quirked his eyebrows at the job that had just been shoved onto their already full plates. But he knew better than to oppose his boss, and Tyra seemed to know that, so she simply gave him a wink. The older man, who stood next to Tyra, his name Raphael Gautier, cleared his throat to speak. "On to the matter at hand, you 2. It seems we have a rather dire case in our hands, and you 2 seem to fit the job." He sneered at Ashley, who simply gave him a big smile. "Unfortunately so." Now, Raph, we both know these 2 are the best suited to this case in particular," Tyra said, followed by Bullseye's quiet muttering. "You sure it's not 'cause we're the only ones available?" To which the woman simply laughed and offered no retaliation. "In any case," Tyra continues, "these ladies got a job for ya, so you better listen up. To brief ya, these 2 seem to be tangled in a magical and potentially political affair." She looked at the maid. "Miss Linwood," she called out. Her expression hinted that it was the maid's time to speak up. The maid introduces herself as Rosie Ann Linwood, while the little girl is Melody Wallace. Rosie Ann cleared her throat, still looking rather unsure, but she swallowed away her doubt and began to explain. "Hello, my name is Rosie Ann. The little one is Melody. We've been on the run for a few days. We're no longer sure what to do. Melody's parents there. They're trying to hurt her." Ashley raised an eyebrow at that. "Abuse, then?" he asked. Rosie Ann shook her head, looking confused and distraught. "Not quite. I mean, yes, but I've been Melody's caretaker ever since she was adopted." The maid gently stroked the little girl's head. "But, see, Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, they were never really around for her, which, well, was odd, but I simply assumed it's because they were busy. They were very important people, you see. But recently they've been trying to take her away. They would take her somewhere, and I wasn't allowed to accompany her. She would be gone for a few days, and when they returned, she has marks on her." She shook her head again. "I don't think they expected me to find out. After all, they gave her bandages over the marks. The private doctor was the one to change them. I wasn't even allowed to bathe her, but one day Melody got hurt. She fell in the backyard chasing a frog. He cleaned up her wound, and that was when he saw the odd runic marks carved on her skin. Rosianne looked perplexed. I mean, I knew the masters were profound mages, but it didn't make sense to me they would do such a thing to their own child. And why at that? Raphael poured the woman a glass of tea, to which she thanked him and offered it to Melody instead, who seemed to refuse to pry herself off of Rosianne. I apologize, Rosianne spoke. Tyra shook her head. There's no need, Ms. Linwood. With a shaky sigh, Rosianne continued. I don't know what to do. I asked Melody what happened, and the thing she explained, her expression full of distraught. Melody said there were people underground. It was dark. Their faces were obscured, but they did things to her. She couldn't remember most of it, but she said she heard chanting of words she doesn't recognize. She said it was painful. It hurt. I could only assumed it was some form of ritual. I don't know what for or why. Bullseye spoke up. Is that why you ran? Rosianne shook her head. Not quite. I gathered up my courage to ask them. The Wallaces. I was horrified, and I know I would lose my job, or worse even, but I couldn't. I simply couldn't. She paused. She looked at Melody, who was beginning to drift off, exhausted from their journey. They gave me an offer. Forget everything. Never bring it up again. And they'll pay me. They would buy my silence. I knew then something was wrong. I asked them what. They only told me I no longer need to worry about her. Rosianne begins to sob quietly. I ran afterwards. Quietly. During the night. I packed what I could for the both of us. It was a stupid thing to do, I know. I could have stayed safe, I could get money, but I couldn't. Bullseye walked up to her, placing a hand on her shoulder, and shook his head. You did the right thing. He said the parrots were profound mages. I'm guessing they have political ties to the government. That's why I couldn't go to the police. Then I heard about this place from a friend. Tyra nodded. You came to the right place. Now, she looked at both her boys. I think that's enough. These ladies have gone through quite a bit. We can let them rest for now. You can question them tomorrow. Aye, aye, boss. Ashley replied. But, Tyra continues, see, we need to keep them guarded. But me and Raph, we have a date with an important client. The others aren't exactly back yet. Of course, Bullseye said, without a moment of hesitation. Don't worry, I already prepared you guys a room. Tyra looked at Rosianne, walking over towards her gently. Our office is close to a motel that belonged to a friend of mine. Should be safe. These two men will guard the two of you while you rest. Are you okay with that? Rosianne hesitated. Yes, of course. But I don't have much with me. I'll pay what I have. Tyra cut off her sentence by throwing the two boys the room key. We'll take what you got after the case is closed. And if the money isn't enough, well, we accept payment from other methods. But we can discuss that tomorrow. The young maid seems too tired to argue at the moment, and simply nodded in agreement. With that, Rosie-Ann, a sleeping Melody carried by Bullseye, and Ashley made their way to the room rather quietly, the men renting the room next door and let their girls rest for the night. And with the sound of a click, the door was closed, locked, leaving these wary people a moment of rest. In the other room, the two detectives lie in their rented space. Ashley on the bed, and Bullseye on the armchair. Face into the pillow, Ashley's voice was muffled, his words completely inaudible. With a sigh, the stout detective threw a cushion over towards his partner. "I can't tell what you're talking about, damn it. Get off the pillow." And Ashley does just that. Looking up at the other, he has a rather quizzical look on him. "Hey, Claire," he calls out. "Bullseye," his partner corrected. "It's Colts, isn't it?" "It has to be." Ashley's voice was almost sure, deep in thought still. "Well, it's definitely the first thing I had in mind after hearing that story. But at the moment, we still know too little to draw any sorts of conclusions." "I mean, yeah, but..." Ashley sat up, a hand propping against his chin. "If it's cults, we'll definitely have to be more careful about this. Depending on what group it is, it could be real dangerous." "It's a part of the job description." "What? Did you miss the orientation to detective school?" Ashley laughed at the retort. "I'll have to look at the marks in Little Melody tomorrow. It'll give us a clue." "Think you can figure out the cult?" Bullseye asked him. "Well, I can at least figure out what they're trying to do. Depending on the sort of magic they're using, it'll cut down some choices for us." "Got it." Bullseye nodded. "Anyway, what if I should keep watch, just in case?" The large man already looked like he was making coffee, returning to his seat on the armchair. But before he could even say anything, Ashley spoke up first. "Go sleep. I can take first watch," he offered. However, Bullseye raised an eyebrow. There was a hint of annoyance on his face as he motioned to the coffee he had just made, clearly for himself, and then at the chair that he was sitting on, not made to be slept on. Ashley only needed to see the look on his face to understand that he should not be arguing, and he pulled up both hands, flopping back onto the bed. "Nighty-night then, Claire." Yeah. And as the few who could afford it begin to drift off, Bullseye takes out a book and simply begins to read to help pass the time. It was quiet, but he quite liked it that way. Hours pass fairly uneventfully. Outside the window, the wind howls as a storm begins to hit, thunder roaring menacingly. The detective sighed, taking out a spare blanket from the closet to warm himself. But the door to the poor thing is old, making an audible creak as it was opened. Ashley suddenly snapped awake. Pushing his face off the bed, Bullseye apologized, asking him if he woke him. Though the other shook his head. His expression looked rather tense. "No," he said. "Wasn't you. There's people close," he said with a quiet voice. Those words seemed to be enough for Bullseye to reach an understanding. His own face grew grim. "You sure about that?" he asked, and Ashley nodded. Undetected Rana, roughly in the roof. He looked up towards the ceiling. How many? Bullseye asked, his hand reaching towards his bag to ready his weapon. I'm not sure. 2. Maybe 3? We need to get the girls. Ashley stood up, readying himself as Bullseye rushed to knock on their neighbor's door. But before they could even receive a response, they heard a shrill shriek coming from inside. Leaving absolutely no time to lose, Bullseye began banging on the door, slamming himself against it to force it open. Muffled screams coming from inside. Rosianne's voice begging their assailant to leave them be. Bullseye cursed under his breath and gave the door one last kick, hard enough to snap the rusted hinges apart. Slamming the door open, he pulled up his gun immediately and rushed inside. Nobody move! He yelled, eyes carefully scanning the area. Immediately, he saw Rosianne and Melody huddled on the ground against the wall. The window was forced open, curtains flowing rapidly against the stormy wind, and a single figure stood just in front. Their face obscured from the heavy cloak they were wearing, but it was clear that they weren't here to simply visit. Bullseye carefully but swiftly stood in front of the girls, gun still aimed towards the unwanted guest. Who are you? He asked. What do you want? But no answer was given, to which Bullseye clicked his tongue. Although expected, it was irritating nonetheless. Put your hands up in the air, he says. Don't do anything funny and no one gets hurt. Still no response for a few moments, until eventually, the figure slowly raised up their hands. The detective's eyes watch closely as both hands of the assailant are now over their head. Bullseye waited a moment, slowly walking towards the figure, gun still pointed at them. Good. Stay there, he demanded. However, before he could even utter the last of his words, the figure, still with their arms raised, let out a scoff as the palm of their hand began to quickly glow. Barons, a low voice muttered mockingly under the hooded man's breath, and with a flash, his hand shot a horrid light towards Bullseye. Rosianne screamed, hugging Melody protectively, bracing for impact. Yet seconds passed, and she had yet to feel pain, or hear a terrible crashing, or see a frightening scene of destruction. The maid looked up and saw her assailant frozen in place. The shocking light disappeared. The pulsing magic in his hand halted. The man made no movement, as if time itself has stopped, but just for him alone. Rosianne voiced her confusion, to which Bullseye simply walked closer towards the man, pulling back his gun and slamming it against the back of the figure's neck. And after a moment, with a snap of Bullseye's fingers, as if time had finally been resumed, the assailant fell to the ground. Bullseye let out an exhausted sigh and muttered a curse. That's the last of it, damn it. The group then heard a familiar voice calling out from the outside of the window. Nice job, Claire. Ashley stepped into the broken window, drenched from the storm, but cheery as ever. And where the hell have you been? Bullseye questioned the man's unfortunate absence, to which Ashley held up both hands. Hey now, is that how you thank me? And with a snap of a finger, dark, shadowy arms slid into the room as well. In its grasps were 2 other people, adorning a similar cloak to the assailant, presumably his allies. both either dazed or knocked out. Wanted to catch him off guard, so I'll let you shine on the spotlight. Ashley gave his partner a grand old smile that was met with a smack up the head. Did you at least call the boss? Already did. She said to tie him up and haul him back to base. Seems like some of our fellow pals have returned from their job, so we could have extra hands. Sounds good. Bullseye nodded. Before looking back at their clients, shaking, afraid from the encounter. Motioning Ashley to keep watch over the enemies, he begins to walk carefully towards the girls. Hey, you two alright? The both of them nodded. Melody was shaking, but for the first time ever, she spoke up towards Bullseye.
That's it.
She pointed at the assailants.
They looked like them. The people.
She pointed at her forehead, mimicking the hood of the cloak. Bullseye nodded again, and crouched to get on the girl's eye level. Don't worry. We'll figure this out, okay? We'll make sure to keep you two safe. Melody sniffled, uttering the quietest,
Okay.
before sinking back into Rosie Ann's arms. Thank you. The maid could only repeat her gratitude. Unfortunately, the relief was suddenly halted as a yelp was heard, coming from behind them, followed by Ashley cursing and the sound of a crash as he was thrown to the side. Claire! He yelled out. Bullseye snapped backwards. Ashley having been thrown to the side, he sees a fourth figure standing in the middle of the three tied assailants. But underneath them was a large, pitch-black circle glowing. All four figures began to sink into the hole. Space Mage! Ashley called out, throwing his hand, summoning shadowy arms once more, but he was too slow. The four figures were swallowed completely under the teleportation circle and disappeared. Bullseye cursed again. Shit! And rushed towards Ashley, whose head began to bleed. You okay? I'm fine, he sighed. Should have known. I thought they were being too obvious about the presence. They were hiding a fourth one. Sorry. Bullseye shook his head. No, it's fine. Everyone's okay. That's what's important right now. Although we might have to head back to base anyway. Get the rest of our friends some overtime. We'll need the extra eyes. It'll be safer that way. Walker laughed. All right, as long as you're the one telling them. Let's go. And without a moment of proper rest, these wary people now set their foot back to the road, towards the office building once more. Careful in their steps, they return to a safer haven with comrades in arms. For the rest of the night, it's at least a little more peaceful than before. Though it might not have been a solid 8 hours of sleep, these detectives and their clients managed to get some wink of sleep, so that they may tackle the next day properly. Sidereal Cabal, Judas Kiss, Case 1, Unsought Inheritance, Episode 1. Thank you for listening.